ripping off files or not.
This was not tied to him.
I don't think these are going to fly with the American public.
This was not, well, this was not tied to him. I do know it was somewhere out of the Northeast, so it was quite a ways from Malibu.
No, I don't understand this. If somebody puts, you know, copyrighted material on his website and says anybody can take it, and how's the ISP going to hide that from Hollywood?
I don't think they were worried about websites. Your machine.
Peer-to-peer. Oh.
Your Windows machine, we're going to come visit.
They wanted the right to hack into your computer and do whatever they wanted.
But they're worried about everything. And
they are worried about everything.
They've shut down some sites in China that have been like Napster, right, already. They've gotten the ISPs to block those destinations.
Can they do that? If I'm just on the network and I've got my personal firewall, Zone Alarm running, can they get in? Zone Alarm says no. Gibson Research says no, they can't get in. Can they get in anyway?
They can if they go in through a peer-to-peer program that you've already enabled.
Oh, no, okay. Well, I haven't then. Okay.
Or through a Microsoft virus or through the XP Windows update mechanism.
We don't exactly know how they're coming in.
They aren't going to say.
They think they're more respectable than the average hacker.
Can you imagine the political backlash once? I think that that's an approach that they'll be reluctant to take, to really do something that would cause problems for a lot of people if they, got called on the carpet.
Well, it had to have been stated somewhere they were going to do it, or they would not have set up this honeypot.
Given that they haven't been able to keep their website up for the past several months, it's hard to worry too much about it.
Right. It's not a real risk.
That's their main
Yeah, that was
website.
one of them. They changed again a few days ago.
Another point on the DSL, is DSL really broadband?
Good question.
Right on the ragged edge of it is.
I mean, it's the next step, but isn't there always another step down the road? This is not linear like this, but this is just to show you, how extreme this growth has been in terms of the length from 14 to 95 years copyright. It's pretty substantial. One of the ways that I view the right solution to this is that while Hollywood may look for content totalitarianism or imperialism as total control, and maybe Napster could be argued, and some have said, taken issue with me for the use of words here, maybe Napster says that, content anarchy is the right solution. Anybody can have anything and just make it as easy as possible. If that's what content anarchy means, and Napster wasn't exactly like that, but if you imagine the content anarchy is that other opposing end of the spectrum, it seems natural to me that this is one of those issues where we just have to find the right balance between those 2 points. And let's call it content democracy. A balance between content anarchy and imperialism that accords to individuals substantial benefits from the technology short of content anarchy, while according to corporations substantial benefits of the technology short of the totalitarianism or imperialism. And I think that's really what has to come out, but in terms of how it actually gets implemented, it means that the folks with the business models it's cratering have to find a reasonable business model, and then the protections that come in have to be not so complete that they can just run ragged over everyone. And there's some self-policing things that happen there because people just, they'll stop paying once the rate gets so high. And some people have argued, that we're at that point now in terms of the prices of DVDs or something. They believe, it's just a huge ripoff, and if that's the case, then that's the natural supply and demand balance point that comes out of it. But from a policy standpoint, there are probably some very clear delineations you can make in terms of, is it reasonable for Napster to be able to do what they're doing? Can you permit that? It was closed down. To me, it seems like maybe it would have been better not to have been closed down, but to people to look at this issue of how do you actually blend its capabilities for copying with what Hollywood's objectives are, so that you don't totally destroy Hollywood's objectives, but you don't also destroy the ability to leverage that type of technology.
They've already gotten an economic discussion of that in terms of consumers. They just announced the other day a study that said that people would be willing to pay essentially double the amount of money to avoid copy protection. When offered the difference between a $9.99 DVD that was copy protected and one that was approximately $20 that was not, they said they were willing to spend $20. So you've already got an understanding of what the consumer is willing to pay for that additional freedom, and that's actually a good way to start in terms of the business model, since most people, honestly, aren't into distributing DVDs or movies for profit, which is really the key point of One Stop.
Exactly. I think that's the point, is that there are natural technological capabilities that are going to be natural. If you do it a certain way, it'll either be a huge problem or not. And I think that, and what I'm saying is, maybe in the case of Napster, the fear was so huge that they just shut it down rather than trying to tweak it a little bit more.
I think you're right.
And a lot of people are, I mean, that's one of the points I think Bill pointed out in his introduction here, is that, you know, there are companies that are not being financed in the Valley because the fear is lingering, that they'll just be killed.
The case with Napster is also very unusual because once they got a hold of the emails inside of Napster, it was pretty clear that it was more of a piracy operation than anything else. Now, what is the judge going to do that faces something like that? They're going to be in an awfully tight space to justify technology when they understand what the motive was behind it.
What was the piracy?
The piracy is established by the emails for investment and for management of the business, saying that they fully understood that they were making money off of Hollywood's inability to sell its goods. And in effect, they were indirectly making money off of piracy. And that once the judge sees something like that, it's an open and shut thing. They have to deal with it. The problem is that such a ruling then broadly affects a whole area of peer-to-peer. That's the killer.
In actuality, I don't know if any of you ever used Napster. I will fess up to the fact I did have it. I would say they were, in terms of their relationship with users, were one of the more ethical, upfront organizations around.
Absolutely.
In that they basically were just what they said they were. And I remember when I first saw that thing, I thought about it for a second, and I sent an email, which was never replied to, saying, I'm thinking about this. Are you going to stay inside your directory, the directory I'm giving you when you're on my machine, or are you going to wander wherever you are? Because I know Windows has no way of controlling where you go once you're here. And I'm saying you can come here with your software, so you can pretty much do what you want. It's coming down to me binary. And he never replied. Never replied. But I do believe they pretty much did stay inside that thing. Whereas I do believe that their rip-offs right now are probably nowhere near as ethical and are doing lots of things that you'd be very disappointed if you knew what they were really doing.
It reinforces the point that Jim was making before the show, that the duration of change is long, because it's either generational, because it takes a long time for people to come to grips and to solve the problems. But if somebody walks down the street and gets hit by a car, maybe it was a fluke, or maybe it was because of strange. But it means that people aren't going to be walking down the street for a while before they get the courage or other things come up. So I think that's consistent with the concept.
The one thing that also fits in here is that, do you remember that we had copy-protected software for a long time, especially in the early days. And what happened was that the problems with the copy protection mechanism got to be so obnoxious and so difficult to deal with after a while, just maintaining floppy backups and the like, that it injured the growth rate of the personal computer market. And actually certain groups were incented to not use copy protection. So if Hollywood tries incredible copy protection mechanisms in their content totalitarianism, they dry up their own market because they fundamentally damage the market of their properties sometimes. And so there's a self-adjusting mechanism here that sometimes comes into play with, when people ask for too much control, sometimes they get the worst possible thing, they get it, and they kill themselves unknowingly.
Isn't the memory of that and the threat of that the reason they're paying $20 for a uncopyright protected CD versus a cheaper price for a copyright protected CD?
In my case, I would think even more, because that was a real pernicious time.
I don't think what killed copy protection was the fact that the buyers didn't like it. I think what killed it was the fact that no matter how good the copy protection got, there's only somebody came along with a program that defeated it. So that eventually the software publishers gave up because it was constantly being defeated. If you had a new copy protection scheme, it was good for about 6 months, and then the next version of the copy protection buster would defeat it. And I had tried to publish something that was copy protected and bought some kind of special disc called ProLock that had special, that was marked, the hardware of the floppy was marked so that it, you could, and they gave you software so that you could have a one-of-a-kind installation of that thing that couldn't be run anywhere else except from that disc. And eventually somebody else figured out how they could run my program from within another program and make a copy of it with all the copy protection removed, and I, bought a copy protection buster that busted my program after spending all this money on ProLock.
Well, the only way to have a subway where people don't jump on and ride for free is to not have a subway at all. And so it just goes to the fact that that it's a natural process, that the objective is to maintain enough people behaving in the way that works for the system to work. But with content, the only way that you're not going to have content stolen is to not ever put it out where it's available. Burn it, and then still someone's going to find some way to steal it, right?
When you talk about policy, where do you define the boundaries of policy here? Because we have economics, we've got technology, and right now I don't see anybody acting with regard to boundaries, period. And so it's very hard to have a policy discussion without knowing where you can have a discussion with people with extreme disagreements here. And you've certainly got the one end of the spectrum and the other end of the spectrum right up here. I don't see how you could have a good definition of where to draw a policy boundary.
In my paper, I talk about the scope of the policy discussion, and because broadband involves so many other things, the policies really for broadband are expansive in scope themselves. I mean, energy policy, because you're talking about broadband as an alternative to transportation, So I think the issue isn't so much that it's difficult to define as that it's important to address. In other words, if we look historically at policy, I think policy is probably extraordinarily inefficient, but also extraordinarily critical. And so, good policy is pragmatic. And what we need to raise are the issues here that are most critical. So, is it critical that Hollywood goes away or not? That probably is critical. Is it critical whether telecom survives or not? That's probably critical too. So, I don't think that the politicians necessarily will have a hard time finding something once it's articulated that there's a problem and it's clear. There'll be all people addressing it from all different directions. I think that's evidenced already in broadband policy that there's so many proposals. What I think is clear from that is that people recognize that it's important to address broadband, and they say, okay, broadband, that's the policy. But I think what's missing is having the clarity of understanding which, and that's probably your question, which interrelationships are the most key, that you can really have a cognizant discussion and a cognizant proposal that will make sense. And I guess I come to that, I think I come to that. Let's see, this paper was really intended to introduce the issues and then to provide some hypotheses and projections for what should happen. But in particular, two of the things that I point out that the scope of policy becomes very critical is the internationalization. To the extent that you have a global network age, whether it's copyright or other telecom types of issues, this is inherently, from my background in satellites are inherently big, radio transmitters, and they don't care what country it is, And so the ITU has always been involved ever since the beginning of satellites as a specialized division of the United Nations to help regulate how that all works together. Well, we have in the United States a certain